and we should be live. I'm just gonna give it a minute until I see that you are actually here. And yes, I can see the number, so you should be here. Welcome everyone. So we've got about, I think about 12 minutes before to start. We're just waiting for everyone to connect. Hi Michelle. So if any of you were completely new to me, if you've just clicked on this live and if you're watching the replay, if you want to skip the hellos and go straight to the point, you could skip the next 10 minutes. We're just here waiting for everyone to connect. So we'll be here for the next 10 minutes. And then we're going for a live walk around the area of Smithfield. Perfect, thank you Tish for the technical check. Hi Linda. And if any of you were new to me and you're watching this on replay, if you wonder how you can join the live next time, the best way is to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. This way you'll get a little reminder, a little notification when I go live. Hi Islam, nice to see you here, welcome. And welcome Marianne. Hi Katie, welcome Caroline. Nice to see you all here. I didn't know whether I was gonna get many people tonight because I very stupidly scheduled my tour at the same time as the Olympics closing ceremony. So that was not a smart move. Well, I didn't know at the time, I didn't know that the ceremony would be on. Not that I particularly care. I was not massively impressed by the opening ceremony, so I don't know why I should be watching the closing one, but hi Mike. So we've got, let me check, 9 minutes to start. Let us know in the chat where you're tuning from. Hi Dawn, welcome. Is Tom Cruise still supposed to skydive? I have no idea what they've planned for the ceremony. I was not massively impressed by the blasphemy in the well, it's not that I was not impressed. You know, it's art, they can do whatever they want. But I'm not really proud of my country because they did not have the balls to admit that they've done it. Because they definitely made a mockery of the Last Supper. Which is fine. Personally, I don't mind. They've been offending a lot of Northern America. But the thing is, then the next day they're like, oh, we didn't mean to do that. We didn't mean to offend. Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Hi, Linda. You know what they've done with the Last Supper? It's actually a stupid little pun that no one understood because in French, the Last Supper is called la Seine, and the river is called la Seine. So they've basically done la Seine on la Seine, which could be funny if it worked in English, but it doesn't. And the big lady playing Jesus, she's an activist. She's fighting for fat acceptance, which is a good cause. She's a lesbian activist. And the next morning, she posted on her Instagram the New Gay Testament. Oh, so it was about the Bible then. Then admit it. So yeah, I was not very proud of my country. Hi Ronnie, nice to see you here. Let me see who I've missed. I think I've seen everyone. If I've missed any of you, welcome. Nice to see you here. I'll stop ranting about the Olympics. So we've got 7 minutes before to start. 7 minutes. Let me show you where I am. We've not been here before. Oh yes, I like the horse. Some people try to find some links with the Bible with the horse. No, it was not. I think it was a Celtic god, the spirit of the Seine, the spirit of the river, basically. And I liked Marie Antoinette. I didn't see anything, you know. Well, I don't have anything against beheadings, as you might know. No, it's only the Last Supper that I think, you know, even if in France you can do this type of art, I don't think the Olympics was the place to do that, you know. Why would you be offending people for no reasons? It doesn't make sense. Although maybe there was no need to get offended, but, you know. So hopefully the closing ceremony will be a bit better. Does anyone know where we are? We've not actually been here before. I decided to start a little bit further up. Mike, I don't even know who Freddie Mills is. Oh yes, definitely. There can be a bit of oversensitive people on the other side of the pond. And also politically, you know, it's a time when people are very divided between, you know, so, yeah. Oh, Gerard is here. Hello, nice to see you here. I want to see you streaming soon. Height of Gemini. So we've got 5 minutes to go. And welcome, Laurie. Let us know in the chat if you happen to be completely new to me. It's always nice to see some new people. Ghostlet yard, no. It is indeed a little yard. Hi Claire, I didn't see you, but I see someone saying hi Claire, so you must be there. Good, so that'll be good to see you back on YouTube. Oh, okay, I see, Mike. I don't know why I imagined he was a musician or something. I don't know why. I guess it sounds like a nice name. Okay, so we've got, let me check, 4 minutes. 4 minutes to go. And hello, Luan. And welcome, William. Nice to see so many of you here already. I thought it might be a bit quiet because of the Olympic ceremony, so that's great to see you here anyway. So we've got, let me check what time. 3 minutes. 3 minutes to go. So if any of you are watching the replay in the next few days, you can still skip 3 minutes to go straight into the action. Yes, I did watch I actually watched the full season, but yes, I did watch the episode with Adam. It's interesting though, because they did go with the narrative that those ladies were all sex workers, but somehow adding the casual is okay. Although, it's been debated in the last few years, some of them we do not know for sure whether they were casual prostitutes or not. And also they've decided to completely skip the famous non-clue, you know, the thing that was a bit anti-Semitist on the graffiti. If any of you had no idea what we were talking about a new Jack the Ripper documentary on Netflix, where one of our streaming friends was featured. Hi, Pauline. Nice to see you here. So we should have 2 minutes. Let me see. 1 minute to go. 1 minute. Oh no, I've not been on vacation. I've not been anywhere. I don't have a single day off till I think it's 18th of September, my next day off. It's peak season, so we don't have. I don't have much time for myself at the moment. Yeah, exactly, exactly, Linda. Okay, let me see. Still 1 minute. Yeah, it was great to see Adam on TV. Well, on Netflix. Yeah, some people like to be offended, and also the internet is a weird place. It really polarizes people. So if you watch those videos of people that are offended, complaining about it, then you're gonna be bombarded with videos about the same. Well, we've seen that in the last few weeks with the riots in the UK. The internet is really to be blamed. Anyway, it is officially time to start. It's 8 p.m. UK time. Welcome everyone. If anyone was completely new to me, I'm Nathalie, and I'll take you into a little dark walk into the area. Let me gracefully stand up and let's go. Let me flip this camera around. So we are in a lovely little yard here called Bleeding Heart Yard. So it's quite a dark little name that has led to quite a few urban myths of murders. We don't know if any of them is true. Probably not. There's probably not much dark history here. It's probably only named after a pub that was called the Bleeding Heart of Our Lady, with an illustration of a heart with swords, probably a very Catholic name after the Virgin Mary. And you know, before the Reformation, a lot of the pubs had very Catholic names. But of course, when you have a place with such a name and with those interesting cobblestones, it's quite easy to imagine tales of murders. And let me show you the name up there, Bleeding Heart Yard. Some say that it might have been a place where they slaughtered deers as well, so it could have been their hearts bleeding. So an interesting name. So there are a couple of murders stories. Both of them are actually late 16th century, like Elizabethan time. The first one, it's an interesting story. They claim that it might have been because of a lady called Alice Hatton. She would have been the wife of Sir Christopher Hatton. And it is said that she contacted the devil to ask for a favor from Queen Elizabeth I for her husband, for her husband, Sir Christopher. And the devil agreed. So Sir Christopher got his favor from the Queen. Then he bought a lot of new land over here, and they had a little housewarming. And Alice forgot to invite the devil. He was the one to thank for all that. And we can see those are former warehouses, because you can see the cranes there that are still here. So the devil that was not invited would have been furious. And apparently poor Alice was found brutally murdered in the yard, or the place where the yard was later on designed, because it didn't exist yet. and her heart was still bleeding. Now, interesting story, but we know that Sir Christopher Hatton, he was a bachelor. He never had a wife, so that's simply not possible. There's another story that claimed that it might have been another Lady Hatton, Lady Elizabeth Hatton. She would have been to some kind of a party, and she somehow went out with the Spanish ambassador, and her mutilated body was found the next morning. Her heart would have been on the floor, still bleeding. Again, nice story, but there's probably no truth in there at all. So there's probably no murder ever committed in that little yard. The name is probably just after the pub. But nice, lovely little place though. It was featured in Little Dorrit. There's a chapter 12 I think it is, with a couple of families that live on that square on a dodgy landlord. So that's why the name might sound a little bit familiar. I think the full chapter is actually called Bleeding Heart Yard. Anyway, this is Farringdon Station. On both sides you have an entrance on the right and the left as well. And guess what? It is haunted. It is haunted by the ghost of a little girl. Her name is Ann Naylor. We mentioned her very quickly in my tour before, but I never told you the full story because somehow I wanted to keep the story for if I was ever gonna do a Christmas murder special, but I never did, so I'll tell you the full story now. Poor little Anne, she was a child that grew up in the workhouse because she was from a very poor family. I don't know whether her parents were dead or if they just couldn't take care of her. She had a sister, an older sister, and they had a bit of an education with the workhouse or the poor houses. They were dealt with by the parish, and they'll take care of those kids. You know, you might have seen, of course, Oliver Twist and all that. Sometimes the kids were lucky enough to have a bit of an education. I'll show you the other side. Apparently on the platforms you can still hear today the little cries of Ann Naylor. So she grew up in the workhouse, and eventually her and her sister were given to a lady, Sarah Metyard, as an apprentice. The apprentice scheme was basically sponsored by the parish. So the parishes at the time, in the 18th century, it was the church, of course, but the church was in charge of everything. It's almost like when today we talk about the local authorities, the local council. And so you had this system of apprenticeship, where you'd be sent into a baker or a hatter or whatever, and the business would get a bit of money from the parish. They'll take care of the kids and they'll train them into their new trade. Now, Sarah Metyard, she had a daughter that was also called Sarah Metyard. Luckily, she was known as Sally. And they were doing hats. They had 5 apprentices, 5 girls. Anne and her sister and another 3. And the girls were badly treated, very, very badly treated, abused. And poor little Anne, she was 13 years old at the time. We don't know if she had any specific health issues, but she was described as quite weak, maybe a little bit fragile. She potentially was not able to work as much as the others, and she was beaten up. She was horribly treated. When you were an apprentice, the trade was quite badly regulated. We talked about that before when we talked about the case on Fleur de Lis yard just off Fleet Street. There was also a case of abuse with those little apprentices. And the poor girl was terribly treated, but terribly. She was kicked with a broom. She was attached to. She was forced to stand attached in the attic for hours and hours as a punishment, and she was struggling so much that one night, in the middle of the night, she tried to escape, and she did. She ran across she ran on the streets. They were not based here. They were based in Mayfair on Bruton Street. That's the street where we've been together. You might remember I've shown you a little plaque on the spot of where Queen Elizabeth II was born. Very different period of history, but yeah. So they were based in Mayfair. So the little Anne is running across the street, middle of the night. When she didn't know what to do, she didn't plan it. She just ran, to save herself. And she ran into a milk guy, Mr. Brown, a milk delivery man, and she asked him for help. The milk guy, he had to do his job, and he said to her, "Go back where you came from." And she said to him, "I can't. That's gonna be the end of me. They'll kill me." And he said, "Go back to the workhouse then." So that's what she did. Look, the cheesemonger is named after me. Not but. Anyway, so she went back to the workhouse, but the thing is, the workhouses, they were dealt with by the parish, and the parish was also responsible for those apprenticeship, they sent her back. So she went to the workhouse, and they sent her back to Mrs. Meteyard, and. Of course, when she came back, the abuse was even worse. She was beaten up by Sarah on Sally Meteyard, very, very badly. And she was locked in. She was often attached in her bedroom. And one day, she was attached upstairs. She was really white and cold, and the other apprentices were really worried. So they called Mrs. Sally. They were like, Mrs. Sally, something's wrong with Anne. So Sally, the teenage daughter, came up and she's like, "Move. If you're not moving, I'll make you move." She removed her shoe. She hit the little girl with her shoe. The little girl didn't move. She was very probably already dead at that point. So she called her mother, and they took the girls away. And they actually they realized they had killed her. They hid the body in a cupboard, still in the attic, and they pretended she was still alive but punished. So the four other little girls didn't know. Every day they would take food to the dead girl to pretend she was still alive. And one day they opened the door. They told one of the girls to go and give her food, and then they pretended that she had run off. I mean, she had run off once, so she could have done it again. So the other apprentice, they kind of believed it, and the body was still there. The body was still there for many weeks, and eventually Anne's sister, she very much suspected the truth. And she ran off as well. We never saw her again. She managed to escape, and she did well. She did manage. And one day, Christmas Eve, the girls went to spend time with their family, the ones that were still there and still alive. So Sally and Anne decided it was time to get rid of the body. They tried to put one hand in. They literally cut her into pieces. They tried to put one hand in the fire, but it smelled so bad, they realized they had to find another solution. They took the body here to a place called Chick Lane, that was where the station stands today, and they literally ditched the body in a sewer. The body was very quickly found, but would you believe, because we are so close to St. Bart's Hospital, where the anatomists do all those dissections, the coroner was involved in the morning, and he believed it was just the surgeons that had ditched some body parts. So there was no inquest, no jury was called. They actually just imagined that it was a leftover from the anatomist. So horrible story. And so far, Sarah and Sally were getting away with murder. For 4 years they did. But eventually, when all the apprentices left, Sarah started to abuse her own daughter, Sally. Sally had grown up a bit by then, and she had met a gentleman. She moved out to live with him. So she was arguing with her mother even more, because her mother was very unhappy that her daughter had left her. She was now alone. And in front of the new boyfriend, they would kind of mention the murder and the abuse. So he was starting to be very suspicious when eventually Sally confessed to her new husband. She told him exactly what happened, and that's when he told the authorities. So the two of them were finally caught 4 years later, and they were hanged at Newgate Prison. So that's where we'll finish the tour. So horrible story, horrible case, but at least they were caught finally. And the ghost of the poor little Anne is said to be hunting Farringdon Station still today. Anyway, let's move on to something a little bit more cheerful. We are now in the beautiful Smithfield Market. It used to be a meat market until a few months ago. It's now closed. They've now moved to Dagenham, I think it is. So when I say market, it was a wholesaler. So they were selling meat to the restaurants and the butchers and the shops. It wasn't really a place where you'd come and buy the food for the meat for yourself. Well, you could, but you would have had to come in the middle of the night. They have some photos of the workers here. It's quite cool. So the place was very busy from midnight to 7 a.m. So that was all night. And eventually soon it's gonna be reopening as the Museum of London. That used to be in Barbican. And we have a lot of those beautiful telephone boxes. So those red telephone boxes, they are listed. They're part of the heritage. We are not allowed to remove them. Most of them are no longer working today. Sometimes at night, some gentlemen a bit drunk use them as a public toilet. Or ladies. Let's not be sexist. Ladies do that as well sometimes. And outside of London, not so much in London, but outside of London, sometimes they are used as a home for a defibrillator. So if you have an emergency, if you spot any accident on the streets, if you called 999, they'll be able to tell you the closest telephone box that can save a life. So that's quite cool. Let me cross over so I'll give you another view of the market from this side. So on the other side of the market, that's where they did public executions for quite a few decades. But on this side, they did something even more unusual. On this side here, this is where they used to come. You'd come here if you wanted to sell your wife. Yes, you've heard this right. If you wanted to sell your wife. Banksy might repurpose one soon. That'll be cool. For those of you that don't know, Banksy has been quite active last week. He's done quite a few stencils of animals. Not very political for once. The message is, apparently it's just because the news are quite dark these days, so he wanted to cheer us up, basically. Anyway, yes, it is here that you'd come if you wanted to sell your wife. So wife selling, that was an interesting practice. It started in the late 17th century, and it was a very popular event. Now, you'd have to remember that at the time there were hardly any reasons why you could be granted a divorce. The only reason really why you could get potentially get a divorce was if your marriage was not consummated. And as you can imagine, that's quite hard to prove. Some people tried. All across Europe, we had what they called the impotence trials. So that's when you'd take your wife to court and you'd physically, in front of the jury, try to perform sexual intercourse. Sometimes they'll bring some sex workers as well, just to prove that it was not working properly. So I'm just laughing because when people on the street can hear only a sentence of what I'm saying, they probably think I'm doing a very, very weird live. Anyway, because I could see their faces, they were like, whoa. Anyway, you take your wife to court to try to prove that it was not working. And as you can imagine, that was very awkward. So if you didn't want to go through that, in the UK only, you couldn't do that in the rest of Europe, but in the UK, well, you could just sell your wife instead. It didn't happen anywhere else in Europe. Actually, the French were making fun of the Brits for doing such things. So the wife selling, what you'd do is you'd put an ad in the paper just to make sure you had a lot of witnesses coming, and it was like an auction. You'll bring your wife with some kind of a neck collar or like a harness. You'd be parading your wife, and she'd go to the highest bidder. Well, she did not have to go to the highest bidder. She could go to the one paying a bit less. I know it sounds extremely sexist, but actually most of the time, or if not every single time, the wife was very much involved. Very often the highest bidder was actually the wife lover. It was all planned ahead. It was never fully legal. That's why they did it in front of a market, because they wanted a lot of witnesses. They wanted people to know that the sale had indeed happened. And sometimes they were including the kids as some kind of a weird package. And before you ask, yes, you could sell your husband. I've done a bit of research and I found 5 cases of husbands being sold. Now, it was really rare because, of course, it didn't make much sense at the time to be selling your husband, because your husband was meant to supply for you. So if you sold your husband, you'd be losing money somewhere along the line. But nevertheless, it has happened. And the practice, the last wife being sold in the country was in Leeds, in front of the market as well. That's always where it happened, in 1911. So, not that long ago, really. So that was an interesting practice. They also did that at Mayfair. So yeah, we had a few different spots in London. Anyway, talking about getting rid of your wife, we had a king, as most of you might know, Henry VIII, that wanted to get rid of his first wife because she failed to give him a boy, Catherine of Aragon. So he had to change, at the time, the only person that could grant you a divorce was the Pope. They wouldn't have called it a divorce, they would have called it an annulment. And the Pope said no. So Henry was like, stuff it then, I'll break up with the Pope. So he broke up with the Catholic Church to create the Church of England. So that's what allowed him to grant himself a divorce. He was then able to marry his favorite mistress, Anne Boleyn. And you wouldn't have got a penny for your husband. Well, you never know. Put the auction on, you never know. And obviously, when the king split with the Catholic Church, a lot of the priests were not massively excited about it. And this beautiful building used to be a monastery. And it is known as the Charterhouse. And the prior here, a priest called John Houghton, he refused. He refused to swear oath to the king. He refused to kneel in front of the king. He then was taken for what we call high treason. If you went against the king, that's high treason. Do we know what we do to the high traitors? They would be hanged, drawn, and quartered. Now, you'd be dragged behind horses, you'd be hanged, but you know when you were hanged with a short noose, if your neck was not broken, you could be alive for quite a few minutes. Sometimes, if you were lucky, you might have had a friend in the audience that was able to help by pulling your leg. Some say that might have been the origin of the phrase, pulling a leg. And so then you'd be taken down from the scaffold before to be dead, and then they'll quarter you. Now, there were different ways of being quartered. If you were lucky, you might just be cut. Oh yes, definitely, Asif. There's so much to do in London. You can never get bored of London, really. That's why I'm still here 17 years later. And so yeah, you could be cut. That was the easiest way. Or sometimes they could attach one leg to one horse, the second leg to a second horse, the third limb to a third horse, and your last arm to a last horse. And then they'll tell the horses to go 4 different directions. So not a very nice way to go. So that's what happened to the prior. He was quartered, and one of his arms was nailed to that very wall as a deterrent, to show people not to mess with the king, not to go against the king. So yeah, not a nice way to go. Let's have a look at the letterbox. So for the ones that don't know, on the letterbox you always have a little cipher. So that's V, so V-R, Victoria Regina. So the letterbox here is at least 123 years old. That's quite cool. Anyway, so in the Charterhouse, there used to be a school at some point. So after the monastery, after the dissolution of the monastery, it became a place where Queen Elizabeth I actually spent a bit of time here at the time of the Tudor. Then it was bought by a commoner. And he created a school as well as a place for pious elderly to live. And still today, it's still pious elderly, men and women, but they are not allowed to get together. If they want to get married, they have to move, because you have to be single. Well, you could live in sin, but if you want to get married, you have to move out. Anyway, this lovely little square here, it is Charterhouse Square. Today, it's quite nice. If you come at lunchtime, you might see a lot of city boys having their sandwiches. But do you remember, some of you have followed this tour before, do you remember what this square used to be used for? Today at lunchtime, we are in the middle of the city, so you have a lot of business people around here. So you'll see a lot of people having a lunch on the grass. But it's hiding a grisly past. What did this little square used to be? Let's see if you remember. Exactly, Trish. It was indeed a plague pit. We didn't know for sure for many years. For many years it had been rumored that it was a plague pit, but we didn't know for sure. Even at the time when the school was here, the school has been moved. It still exists, but it's now in Godalming. Some of you might have been with me to Godalming in Surrey. And at the time of the school, some of the bigger kids, they sometimes used to grab the head of the little kids and stick them to the ground to force them to listen to the voices of the people that might have been buried alive. But we didn't know for sure. It's only when they did in 2014, when they dug for the Elizabeth line, you know, the new tube line, that's when they found a lot of bodies indeed. We believe that as many as 5,000 people are buried in there. So they found a lot of bodies, skeletons, and with modern forensics, they indeed found traces of the Yersinia pestis, you know, the plague bacteria. So it was indeed a plague pit. For those of you that don't know what a plague pit is, It was basically an improvised burial ground. Because with the plague, so with this one we're talking about the plague of the 14th century. So many people died in one go that the little graveyards were completely saturated. And we ran out of places to bury our dead, so they improvised those plague pits where people were buried very quickly. When you see documentaries and stuff, sometimes they're almost, they come with a cart with a lot of dead bodies and they dump them. Apparently that's not true. Apparently, even if they were buried very quickly, they would still be facing up, facing God. They'd never bury someone looking down, so they still took care of them. And when they did the excavations here, the most peculiar thing they found was 2 skeletons of men. The skeletons appeared to be holding hands. Now that is very peculiar. Some might say that it might have been a gay couple and they might have asked to be buried that way, but that's very unusual in the 14th century. Or maybe they had been buried alive, or one of them, and maybe as they realized that there was nothing they could do, the only thing they could do was to grab each other's hand. Who knows? We'll never know. But being buried alive was a proper phobia for many centuries. Today, with the advance of medicines, there's absolutely no chance today, almost no chance that would ever happen to anyone. But back in the day, it did. We have found some coffins with scratch marks inside, so it did happen every so often. And that was a proper phobia that people had. In Victorian times, they even invented a system. Very touching. They even invented a system where you could pull a rope to ring a bell. So if you woke up in your coffin, you could find a rope to pull and ring the bell. Some say that it might be the origin of the phrase dead ringer. And some even claim it might be the origin of the phrase saved by the bell. Now, personally, I don't think saved by the bell comes from those coffins, because in French we say saved by the gong. So I believe it refers to the gong after the end of the boxing matches. But who knows? Anyways, this is the second station, Farringdon. So this is for the Elizabeth line. So that's the new station. The Elizabeth line, hi Kurt. It is the new tube line that opened, I think, about 2.5 years ago now, named after Queen Elizabeth, of course. Now, we've already kind of touched into the subject of body snatchers. I'm sure most of you that have followed my tours before, you already know quite a lot about body snatchers. But for those of you that don't, the body snatchers, they were some people stealing the newly buried bodies to sell them to the anatomist. At the time, the only bodies that were given to science were the bodies from the executions. We had some, but not enough. So we had a problem with body snatchers. And if you've ever been to Edinburgh, you might have heard of Burke on Hare. Burke on Hare, they were known as body snatchers, but I'm just gonna wait because it's a bit noisy. So yeah, they were known as body snatchers, but they were not. They actually never snatched a body in their life. They were murderers. Instead of bringing some bodies that were stolen from the cemetery to the anatomist, they started to kill people instead. Kill people that were foreigners or people that would not be missed, or at least not in the local community, and then they'll sell them to the anatomist. When they were caught, Burke on Hare in Scotland, that inspired the London burkers. The London burkers, they were a gang of London body snatchers that decided to do exactly the same thing. So instead of going to steal the bodies, they decided to kill people instead. So what they did is they'll wait in a pub or anywhere like that. They'll wait until they could see someone really drunk, and then they used to get them even drunker. Then they'll often drown them. Today, with the modern forensics, it's very easy, you know, when you do an autopsy to find when someone drowned, because you can find water in their lungs. But back in the days, they didn't really spot it that easily. So what they did is they took those drunken people and they put them in a well or something, their heads under water until they drown, being very careful not to leave too many marks on the body, and then they'll bring the body to the anatomist. And they'll make quite a bit of money doing that. And would you believe this lovely little pub here, the Rising Sun, was one of the places where they targeted their victims. Today it's a lovely pub, but at the time it would have been a very dangerous place to come for a drink. Now the London burkers, they were also executed where we'll finish the tour at Newgate with an audience of 40,000 people, to give you an idea. And they were caught. Oh, I've never noticed here we have a coal cover. Let me show you. So those are for the, would have been to deliver the coal, I think. So yeah, the burkers, they were caught with the case of Carlo Ferrari, the Italian boy. I think he was 14 years old, a young boy from Italy that was sold to Guy's Hospital. The body snatchers, very often they used to remove people's teeth. They were sold to the dentist to make dentures. And Gerard is known as Curious Tales on tours, so that's probably why you don't see his name. Curious Tales is Gerard. Yeah. So yeah, they were. Oh, they came from a place called the Rising Sun. That's cool. So yeah, those teeth, they'll be stolen from the cadavers. They were known as Waterloo teeth, because when with the dead soldiers of Waterloo, some people stole their teeth to sell to the dentist. It's hard to imagine to have a denture with dead people's teeth, but yeah, that's what they did. If you remove the teeth from a cadaver that has been buried a couple of days, it doesn't bleed. But if you remove the teeth from someone you've just killed 10 minutes ago, it might bleed. And that's exactly what happened with little Carlo Ferrari. When they sold his body at Guy's Hospital, the anatomists were a bit suspicious because he had a lot of blood in his mouth. The anatomist pretended to go and fetch the money to pay the body snatchers, and they actually went to fetch the police. So that's how they were caught and finally executed. Now, we are by a lovely church called St. Bartholomew. It's one of the oldest churches in the city of London, 1123 to be precise, and there's a little graveyard. So let's go and explore the graveyard. Now, I know this tour is called London Way of Death, but for a moment I'd like to introduce you to the Victorian Way of Death. In the 19th century, they had some interesting mourning rituals. Now, I don't want to say that grieving was any easier at the time, because it probably wasn't, but it was much more often. You know, when you were a mother, you might have, 12 kids, and you might lose 6 out of tuberculosis, cholera, typhus, malnutrition, whatever it might be. So you'd be grieving much more often. And when they lost a loved one, they used to keep them in what we call today the living room. At the time, would you believe, they used to refer to it as the death room. So they'll keep the body in the death room for about a week for people to come and pay their last respect. They'll send some invites to the funerals. If they had money, sometimes they used to bake funerals biscuits. And if they had money, they might also pay for some professional mourners There were ladies that were paid to follow the coffin at the funerals. They'll dress in black, they'll follow the coffin, and they'll cry and cry and cry for a loved ones that they had never loved because they had never met them. And very sadly, sometimes those mourning ladies, those crying ladies, were actually working hand in hand with the body snatchers. They were being paid to cry at the funerals, and actually they were actually kind of taking notes of the location of the grave, as well as the condition of the dead, the age of the dead. You know, if it was a child or if they were pregnant, that was even more valuable for the body snatchers. So that's quite sad. And also, if you had money before to bury your loved ones, you might have taken a post-mortem photography. Yes, you've heard this right. They called it memento mori. So they would often take a photo of their dead. See, the headstones are often against the wall here, so they're kind of attached so they cannot fall, because they don't want them to be unstable. There was actually a tragic accident in Liverpool, a kid that played on a headstone that fell on him. So they really want to make sure that doesn't happen again. So very often they either laid down on the floor or placed against a wall. So now, the Victorian post-mortem photography, I know it's a very weird subject for us today, but you know, today, if I was to die tomorrow, you'll have tons of photos of me on my Facebook. I mean, today we have tons of photos. Back in Victorian times, people didn't have that many photos. You know, photography was very expensive. So often you might have a photo, a wedding photo, maybe a family photo 10 years later. But, you know, having a photograph was quite expensive. So if a little child was to die, very often you didn't have a photo of them yet. So it kind of made sense to want a last photo of them before to bury them. So if you are a bit squeamish, close your eyes for a minute, because I'm going to show you some photos of people that might be dead. I'm going to show you a few examples of memento mori. So this one is a classic example here. On the right hand side, you've got mummy with a dead infant. In the middle, it's daddy with the dead infant. On the left hand side, that's when it's interesting. It's actually the mother that's passed. So that's very sad. And that's interesting that they keep that as a souvenir. Let me show you some more. That's quite a classic one as well. You see all the family with the little girl that passed. It sounds very odd for us today, but at the time it made sense, you know, if you had the money to do so. Now, this is when it gets a bit creepy. On the right hand side, it's quite a classic one. On the left hand side, very often the dead, they had their eyes closed on the photographs. And what they used to do is to develop the photograph and on the eyelid to paint the eyes open. Sometimes it looked very good, sometimes not so much. Sometimes it looked a little bit creepy. Now let me show you some more. Oh, that's an interesting one as well. On the right hand side, it's quite a classic one. You know, the gentleman has his dates, and you can clearly see that he's passed. On the left hand side, that's when it's interesting. The photography at the time was a very long exposure. So you'd have to stay still for a very long time. And see the parents there. They are alive, the parents. They are a bit blurred because they're moving, they're breathing, you know. So if the photography is a minute of exposure, you'd have to stay still for a minute. The girl, she's very much in focus because she's dead. Now, let me show you a last one. I've chosen pictures that were published by the BBC because it's usually a fairly reliable source of information. According to the BBC journalist, I'm not convinced, but according to the BBC journalist, the little girl on the left here, she's actually passed. She's being held by some kind of hooks. Now, I'm not convinced. If you know, sometimes I know that after my tours, sometimes people like to do a bit more research on the subjects we talked about. if you end up Googling Victorian postmortem photography, memento mori, be very careful what you look at on the internet. There are a lot of fake. You have a lot of wannabe journalists or bloggers or YouTubers that would take any Victorian photo and they'll tell you this one is dead, this one is dead, literally standing corpse. Because sometimes you see some kind of hooks behind them. It's not because they're dead, it's because the exposure was so long that sometimes they'll give you something to rest your body, so you were still. If you ask a mortician, there's a lady on YouTube, she's a mortician, she's actually called Ask a Mortician. She'll tell you that it's very difficult to stand a corpse. So yeah, be very careful what you look at on the internet. Anyway, let's go and see the entrance to the church. And let me show you the height of the graveyard. So see the level of the church here? The level of the graveyard is at least 1.5 meters higher than the church. Do we know why? Do you remember why? I think some of you might. Why is the graveyard so much higher than the ground level? Any guesses? Do you remember? I'm sure you do. YouTube is always a bit slower with the chat. At the time of Hego, I'll get the messages very quickly, but on YouTube it's a bit longer. Exactly down. Too many bodies piled up. At the beginning of the 19th century, to give you an idea, between the year 1800 and 1840, the population of London had doubled. So London was struggling to find space to bury their dead. It's because of the Industrial Revolution, you know, many people moved into the capital. So those little graveyards by the churches, they were completely saturated. Bodies were piled up. Grave diggers were paid by the foot, the deeper the better. Sometimes you'd be sold a grave and they'll move you 6 months later or 3 months later, they'll cut you and they'll move your body. And that was actually quite bad for the grave diggers because they had to handle a lot of dead bodies and you could catch typhus or cholera. And apologies, this is a bit gross, but you know, dead bodies, they kind of create some kind of juices, you know? Well, those dead bodies' juices would seep into the ground, into the water sources that we used to drink. So some of the water pumps were actually contaminated with dead bodies. So we had epidemics because of that. So much so that from 1852 it was then illegal to bury your dead in the center of London. That's when they had to create the Magnificent Seven. So the Magnificent Seven, they are those cemeteries on the outskirts of London. So we have Kensal Rise, Brompton Cemetery, Nunhead, Tower Hamlet. I'm taking you to Tower Hamlet Cemetery in 2 days, on Tuesday. So hope you can join me. So those garden cemeteries, those Magnificent Seven, they were on what today we call the outskirts of London. At the time we called it the outskirts. Today it's very much part of London. But you know, people were scared. They didn't want to go and be buried so far away from their local parish churches. So they didn't want to go. They had to find influencers. The influencers of the day, they were of course the royals. So the royals, they would start a trend. The first royal to be buried in any of those Magnificent Seven, that was the Duke of Sussex, one of the child of one of the sons of George III. All his brothers and sisters were actually buried at Windsor, but he accepted to be buried at Kensal Green Cemetery. And his little sister Sophia also followed. Then you had John Snow, the epidemiologist, that was buried at Brompton. So that gave an example, and eventually people started to accept to be buried in the Magnificent Seven. Now, let me turn around to show you the other side of the Smithfield Market. So on this side, you might remember what happened. This side was the site of the executions. Now, you had different types of public executions that depended on your crime. If your crime was a classic crime, you might be hanged. If your crime was about religion, if you were an heretic, you might be burned. According to some say that Mary, Bloody Mary, you might have had the cocktail, it is named after the monarch. Some say that Mary used to fry some Protestant here, that she'd get some body fat from the pigs and the animals that were slaughtered at the meat market to fry some of the Protestants. I don't think there's any evidence of that, but that's what some say. So you could be fried or burned. Bear in mind that being burned in this country, if indeed buried alive, that was actually quite rare. You were often killed before, but if buried alive, that was horrible in the UK because of the humidity. If you were burned alive in the Spanish Inquisition in Spain, you'd be dead very quickly because it's dry. But here, it could take 2 hours to kill you. I mean, that was a horrible way to go. And if your crime was high treason, the very worst execution you could have was to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. So you'd be dragged behind horses, your head slamming the pavement, and then you'd be, well, they'll cut off your manhood, you willy. That was only for men. They didn't do that for ladies, but because of public decency. They were worried that maybe some people might find it a bit too exciting. So yeah, men, they'll cut off your manhood, and then they'll hang you, but not long enough for you to die. And that's exactly what happened to this gentleman, Sir William Wallace. Some of you might have heard of him under the name of Braveheart, or Mel Gibson with a wig, if you've seen the movie in the 90s, Braveheart. So William Wallace, I'm not going to go into details into the reason why he was hanged, drawn, and quartered here, because we have slightly different version of history in England and Scotland. For the Scots, he was a war hero. For the English, he was a traitor. He burned school and all that. So he was indeed hanged, drawn, and quartered here. He was, dragged behind horses, hanged, but not long enough for him to die. Then they cut off his manhood. Then they cut him open. They removed his guts, and they put them on fire. He could have been still alive for a few minutes, so he might have been able to smell the smell of his own guts burning. So that's quite a horrible way to go. And then he was quartered, and his head was placed on a spike on the London Bridge. So quite a horrible way to go. That was the worst punishment. Anyway, the building to my left, this is St. Bart's Hospital. So back in the days, the hospitals, they were managed by the church. So that's why it's such a Catholic name, really. And if I show you up there, there's a statue of an interesting gentleman. This is King Henry VIII. Henry VIII, you might know him because of his 6 wives. Little less known fact about Henry is that he was the first monarch to allow 4 bodies a year to be given to the anatomist, to be given for the dissections. 4 bodies a year, so that was people that were executed. That was not enough, but that was already a start. Before Henry, at the time of the Catholics, the bodies were sacred. We didn't do anything with the bodies. Because at the time they believed that if you were not buried properly, your soul was going to be struggling to reach heaven. So that made sense to give the bodies of people that were executed anyway, because they were not going to go to heaven anyway. So Henry gave 4 bodies a year. that's not much, but that was a start. And let's go and see. The only statue of Henry that we've got in London. So let's go and see the Golden Boy of Pie Corner. The Golden Boy was placed here at Pie Corner to mark the end of the spot where the Great Fire of London finished in 1666. The Great Fire of London started at Pudding Lane. Pudding Lane is on the other side of the city. That was a street that today we'll almost call it like a street food market. You know, you'd have a lot of boys roasting chicken and a lot of flour from the bakers. Officially, the Great Fire of London started there with a baker that didn't extinguish his fire very well. It's debatable. There are a lot of conspiracy theories about the Great Fire of London, but that's where it started. And it finished right here. And you know, at the time, they didn't believe that a catastrophe could be just a catastrophe. You know, they believed that it was God punishing you. And because it started at Pudding Lane and it finished at Pie Corner, they blamed gluttony. So that's why originally he was called the Fat Boy of Pie Corner, but because of political correctness, we renamed it the Golden Boy of Pie Corner. And so he was placed here to remember gluttony. He used to be placed on a pub. Today the pub doesn't exist anymore. It was a pub called the Fortune of War. Let me show you. We are now on Cock Lane. I've got a little illustration of what Cock Lane would have looked like. That's from the 19th century. And you can see the Golden Boy at the corner of the pub there. So anyway, it's time to tell you the story of the scratching Fanny of Cock Lane. I know it sounds funny. It sounds funny on both sides of the Atlantic, really. Because, of course, in the UK, Fanny, it's the female genitalia. On the other side of the pond, I know it's the bum that you call Fanny. Biker. And over here, though, Fanny, let's say that in France, Fanny, it's still a very popular name today. Over here, it's an old name from the 18th century, really. But in France, it's still a very popular name. So I'm very lucky not to be called Fanny, because that'll be quite difficult to bear as a name over here. And so scratching Fanny, it's funny everywhere, but it's an interesting story. We've got four characters. We've got William and Fanny. They are a couple, an interesting couple, because William used to be married to Fanny's sister. And when Fanny died, when the sister died, he decided to date Fanny instead. So that's quite a good couple, because you've got Willie and Fanny. And the landlord, so they moved here in a little lodging house. The lodging houses, they were basically a landlord that would rent some of the rooms like a flat share today. You could stay for a few weeks or for a few days or for a few months. And the landlord was called Richard. So you know Richard, the nickname is Dick. So we've got Dick, Willie and Fanny. You know it's gonna be a good story when you got a Dick, a Willie and a Fanny. Anyway, so William and Fanny moved into the lodging house here. And there was an altercation between the boys. The landlord, Richard, actually borrowed some money from his tenant, William. A lot of money, like £13,000 in today's money. And he didn't give it back. So there was an altercation between the boys. And, Fanny, she was always worried that the ghost of her sister would come back and that she'd be like, hey, what are you doing with my husband? So Fanny was always paranoid with ghosts. And when she lived here, she could hear some scratching noises, like if someone was scratching the walls. The landlord, Dick, he had a daughter, Elizabeth. She could also hear the scratching noises. And one day, Fanny died. Very quickly, smallpox. And William stayed here alone. And apparently the little Elizabeth, one day she had a sighting, a ghost. It was Fanny's ghost. She came back from the dead to tell the little Elizabeth that she had not died out of smallpox. She had been poisoned by her very lover, William, with arsenic. Now, because there was a murder claim, they had to investigate. And people wanted to come here. Everyone wanted to come here. All the journalists, it was the beginning of the free press, and you could, they wanted to come here to spend the night in the lodging house, to comment on the scratching Fanny of Cock Lane, to see if they could hear those. Thank you, Ash. To see if they could hear those noises, and they could. They could hear the scratching noises for weeks. Eventually, though, it came out that it was all a fraud. It was the landlord Richard that had wanted to have a little revenge on Willie. So he had asked his daughter, the little Elizabeth, to hide under the furnitures, to hide and scratch the walls. And the landlord Richard made a lot of money out of it, because a lot of people came to stay in the lodging house. So he made a lot of money, and he actually went on for fraud. So if you hear about the scratching Fanny of Cock Lane, I'm afraid it's not a real ghost. It was only a fraud. But I'll take you in a moment to a place with some real ghosts. So don't worry. Anyway, the little building there, that's a watchtower. Do we know what they were watching out for? What do you think they might have been watching out for here? We are now in front of, still in front of the entrance of Bart's Hospital. It's a private hospital. That's where they treated Prince Philip, when he had heart problems towards the end of his life. So what do you think they might have been watching out for in the little watchtower? I'll give you a clue. At the back, there's a graveyard. Exactly down, body snatchers. Because we're so close to the hospital, the graveyard here was very much targeted by the body snatchers, because all they had to do was to find a way to get the body to the other side. They did not actually get the body straight into the hospital. Remember, I told you that there was a dodgy pub, the Fortune of War, where the Boy of Pie Corner stands today. So that was the pub there. In the pub, on the first level, they had a room in which they used to lay the corpse on the benches. So the anatomist, for the dissections, all they had to do was to cross over the street, check the bodies, check if they were young, pregnant, to check the price, and then they'll have to find a way to transport the body to the other side. Luckily for them, the watchmen that were being paid to stand up here on lookout, it was a very difficult job, graveyard shift. That's probably how we got the expression. Very difficult, very boring. Very often they were a bit drunk, and often they would just take a little bribe to ignore what was happening. So that's how it worked anyway. Today it's somebody's flat. Somebody lives in there. It's actually not the original one. It was destroyed through the First World War. Now it's a copy. And the church, it's the Holy Sepulchre Church. In the church, there's a famous gentleman buried, Captain John Smith. Captain John Smith, if you don't know who that is, this is Captain John Smith from Pocahontas with Miko giving you a biscuit. Those biscuits from the Navy, apparently they were absolutely disgusting. There's a story after the Great Fire of London, you had a lot of people that were found homeless. And there was a big amount of charity to help those people that were on the streets. A lot of people gave money, food, clothes, whatever it might be. And the Navy, they gifted a lot of those Navy biscuits to the homelesses. Apparently they were so disgusting, the biscuits, that the homelesses from the Great Fire of London, they gave it back to the Navy. They were like, no, that's disgusting, we don't want them. So in Pocahontas, you know, Miko, he doesn't like the biscuits. That's probably because they were really disgusting. Anyway, let me remove John Smith. So that's the most famous person buried in the church. Now, let me cross halfway. So I'll show you the pub. We are now in front of a beautiful pub. It is closed today because it is Sunday, so the City of London is a little bit quiet on a Sunday. But this is the Viaduct Tavern. It is one of the most haunted pubs in London. Well, if you followed my tours before, you might know that according to me, the most haunted pub in London is the 10 Bells in Spitalfields. Oh, you recognize this scene from the Pocahontas movie? I should take you to Gravesend again soon to do Pocahontas. I should take you to where she was buried. I'll try to schedule that for September. Anyway, the Viaduct Tavern, it is known as one of the most haunted pubs in London because of their basement. They claim, it is very much debatable, but some claim that their basement might have been a prison cell at some point. Again, it's very much debatable. A lot of historians disagree. But across the street was the site of Newgate Prison. For about 700 years, this was the most famous prison in London, or infamous, I should say. And the basement of the pub might still be a remaining prison cell. I don't know if that's true, but it's definitely a very creepy place. And there have been quite a few ghost sightings. Even in the pub itself, there's allegedly a ghost that steals your drinks away. So you don't want to leave your drink unattended. I think it's probably more people taking the mickey. But, and if you go into the basement, there's been quite a few stories done in the basement. They had a lot of paranormal investigators coming to record the noises and all that. The story mainly started in the 80s when the landlord at the time went down to the basement to get some beer. Apparently a lot of the staff, they refused to go down to the basement to get the bottles. It's often the managers that have to do it because everyone is scared of the basement. But apparently the landlord went down, the door kind of closed behind him, and he heard a voice that said, "It's only the two of us down here now." So quite creepy. And the landlady upstairs, apparently she was reading the newspaper when the newspaper was snapped away from her hands. So quite a scary story. But you'd have to bear in mind that a lot of the pubs in London, they kind of like their ghost story, because of course it's a bit of marketing as well, you know. Some people want to visit a haunted pub, and so yeah, the Viaduct Tavern, it's, even if you don't believe in ghosts, it's quite cool to visit because it's a former gin palace. They even have a painting inside that was the victim of a gunshot. So you have a bullet hole in the painting. Now the gin palaces, they're quite cool. You might have heard or you might have witnessed that we drink a lot of gin in this country. This is because in the very late 1600s, we had a king, William of Orange. He was from the Netherlands, and he actually placed a tax on all the goods coming from Catholic countries. So bye-bye French brandy or French wine, hello gin, because the gin came from the Netherlands. So there was no taxation on gin. Anyone could brew it at home, and it became the drink of the poor. You might have heard the expressions "mother's ruined." You might have seen the famous engraving from William Hogarth, Gin Street on Beer Alley, or Beer Street on Gin Alley. Well, one of which. So yeah, it became the drink of the poor, And you might know the story that really made the reputation of gin that bad. It's the story of Judith Dufour. Judith Dufour, she had a very French name because she was the daughter of a French Huguenot, a weaver from Smithfield. She was addicted to gin. She had a baby, a little toddler, that she had given to the workhouse, to some kind of an orphanage. And one day she was drinking with her friend. Oh, thank you very much, Linda. That's very much appreciated. She was drinking with her friend when she ran out of money. She wanted more gin. So she went back to the orphanage to collect her baby, to collect her little toddler, 2 years old. And at the orphanage, they had given the little one a new little petticoat and a little jacket. Would you believe Judith took her baby away? She strangled her own baby. She killed her little girl. She ditched the dead body in a ditch, and she removed the items of clothing to go and sell the little petticoat into a second-hand shop to get 16 pence. It's hard to translate into today's money, but we're talking less than $25 in today's money. All of that to buy more gin. So horrible, horrible case. She was caught, she was hanged. And talking about killing little ones, we are now in front of the Old Bailey. It's a criminal court of justice. So it was the site of Newgate Prison. Now it's a court of justice where they have tried some of the worst Victorian serial killers. Now, when I say Victorian serial killers, you probably think about Jack the Ripper. If I tell you there was worse, the worst Victorian serial killer, according to me, it is a lady called Amelia Dyer. She was, I don't want to tell you too much about her because I'm hoping to tell you her full story in September. I want to take you to where she lived. But she was what we called a baby farmer. The baby farmers, we've mentioned them in some of my tours before. They were those ladies, business lady, that would take the kids away from you. You might know in the 18th century, in the 19th century, you know, when you fell pregnant out of wedlocks, that was it. All your prospect of marriage, career, all your reputation was gone. You were destroyed. So some ladies preferred to get rid of their babies instead. So you could pay a baby farmer to take the baby away from you. Sometimes it was a one-off payment, and sometimes you would pay them every week. The baby farmers were meant to take care of the little ones, or to give them for adoptions. You know, sometimes in the farms, when they wanted more free labor, they would take more kids. That was a trade that was terribly regulated. Some baby farmers were honest, but a lot of them were actually quite dishonest. Amanda, what protest? Is there a protest today? I don't know about a protest today. And yeah, Amelia Dyer, well, she was taking the little ones and she was actually killing them. The first few, she actually pretended that they died out of starvation. You could sometimes give the kids gin and the symptoms would look very close to starvation. So horrible lady. She was executed here at Newgate. Not a public execution anymore. They were no longer public at the time. And her ghost is said to have come back into the building. Now, again, I might tell you the full story in September. We might go down to Reading. Now, last little story before we go. When this was the site of Newgate in the 1700s, a lot of the executions were no longer happening at Smithfield. They were often happening at the Tavern, the site of Marble Arch today. And the prisoners were often taken from here on a cart. The driver would not drink. They used to stop at a pub to have a last drink for the prisoner, a last one for the road. That's how we got the expression. The driver, the coachman, was not drinking. He was on a wagon. That's how we got the expression. And they'll take them down this road and all the way down to Oxford Street. At the time, Oxford Street was known as Tavern Road. And so they'll take them down this way. Bear in mind, the streets would be packed with people. Depending on the crime, some people might be throwing feces at them, or some ladies might be blowing kisses at them, depending on the crime. So they'll go down that way and they'll go down to the Tavern, where they could be, you could actually hang 3 people at the same time on the same thing. So 3 people on each side. So you could actually hang 9 people at the same time. And again, those executions at the Tavern, they were a big party. They were like a festival today, you know, with drinks and performers and souvenirs and street food and a lot of alcohol. So much so that sometimes the next morning you didn't feel very fresh. Some believe it might be the origin of the expression hangover, literally the day after the hangings. It is debatable, but that could be where it came from. Now, some people were completely against those public displays of cruelty, and you know, and eventually the executions moved here. They decided that it was too much of a party, so they decided to do the executions in the morning at 8 a.m. right here where the fontaine stands today. They were hoping to attract less people. That did not work. You still have, depending on the execution, but you often had 30,000 people anyway, even at 8 a.m. The pub here, well, it's a different pub today, but the Magpie pub, they used to have a balcony on which they did execution breakfast. So you could come and have your full English and watch people be hanged right here. Sometimes the staff of the prison could come out to help with crowd management. And eventually, even that was too much. Charles Dickens was famously against it. He witnessed a lot of execution himself, but he was famously against it. And that's part of the reason why in 1868, finally, those executions were no longer public. They did it inside of the prisons instead. So that's where Dyer was executed, inside. She famously told the executionist, "I'll be back." And she was indeed. Her ghost has been seen inside ever since. Anyway, that's gonna be the end of the tour. Let me flip this camera around and let me know in the chat if you have any questions for me before we go. If not, thank you very much for coming today. If any of you were completely new to me, hope you'll come back. Hope you'll give me a little subscribe and that you'll check my next live. And if you want to see a bit more of me, on Tuesday we're heading to Tower Hamlet Cemetery. So that's one of the magnificent 7, but it's the poorest. So don't expect amazing grand monument. I'll tell you about the stories about the people that we cannot see, the people that didn't have the money for those monuments. And so that's Tuesday. The week after, we're going back to Southwark, where I'll tell you about the Southwark poisoner. That was also a Jack the Ripper suspect, Severin Klosowski. Thank you, Laurie. Thanks, Linda. Thanks, everyone, for coming tonight. If any of you bought me a coffee and buy me a coffee, or if you dropped me a little tip on PayPal, it's very, very much appreciated. I know I cannot thank you live like on YouTube, but it's very, very much appreciated. Thanks ever so much, Pauline. It is thanks to your generosity that I can spend time creating new tours and buying more books and all that. So make sure you know you are very, very much appreciated. It's you that keep this going. And thank you very much for coming today. Hopefully I'll see most of you on Tuesday. If not, I'll see you next week in Southwark. And the week after, it's not scheduled yet, but I'm taking you back to Windsor. And then we've got Angel. The dice have spoken. So with my Monopoly tours, I'll take you to Angel Islington. So that's quite a lot of tours to look forward to. Thank you, Ash. Thanks ever so much, everyone, for coming again. It's always a pleasure to have you along. Thank you for choosing me over the Olympics closing ceremony. And I'll see you soon. Have a great evening, a great morning, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are in the world. Bye-bye. See you soon.